This is McKenna Collins, host of Table Talk. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Ryan Pierce, host of Completely Serious here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Completely Serious, where we talk about sports and have fun with great guests. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Completely Serious. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Today's verse of the day comes from Jonah 2:9. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. Hello and welcome to the Verse of the Day podcast presented by Public House Media. I'm your host, Baxter Colburn. Thanks for being here on this another edition of the show. Quick reminder for you, the show can be found on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and wherever else you find your podcasts. We are constantly popping up in new places, and we are very grateful for that. And for you, the listener, as well, too, that continues to tune in. A reminder for you, if you do have a verse that you would like us to cover here on the show, you can send us a message by going to our Facebook page. Just search for Verse of the Day Podcast by Public House Media, or go to our Instagram and look for at Verse Podcast and send us a message. We'd love to see what verses you would like us to cover here on the show. We've had numerous verses submitted throughout our time, and we'd love to get some new ones in, so please feel free to do so and tell your friends as well. It's always great to have a lot of people around when it comes to submitting verses. Today's verse comes from the book of Jonah, and there's not a lot of catchy verses in the book of Jonah. It's not really one of those Bible books that you have a motivational poster on in your bedroom wall, or you've got it maybe tattooed on your leg or your wrist, or maybe it's the background cover on your computer or your cell phone. The book of Jonah is a great story about a man that knew what God wanted him to do and ran away from God, and then did what God wanted him to do, and then got mad at God because God didn't do what he said he was going to do, but he did do it. And then God continued to basically teach Jonah a lesson and kind of rough him up and beat him up a little bit for the entire book. It's a very fascinating story, and I think a very good reference to what our lives are like, especially what my life and others, I'm sure, that are listening to this are like as well too. At times we're always begging, God, show me what you want, show me what you want. And then he shows us and we're like, no, that's not what you want me to do. Go pick somebody else. And then we run away, and then God is like, get back over here. And next thing we know, we're doing that thing God said he wanted us to do and we said we would never do. And then sometimes it can take a change, and it can just be a crazy, ongoing, never-ending, continuous process, right? Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. But God always wins. Just going to spoil the ending for you. God's always going to get to you. He always is going to win. This verse, though, is a prayer that Jonah is offering while he is inside the belly of the whale. The entire 9 verses that Jonah basically prays this long, heartfelt prayer, calling out to the Lord in his distress and basically saying, Lord, cast me from the deep, cast me into the seas. I have been expelled from your sight. I'm so sorry. I just think I'm going to die while I'm here in this whale. And then verse 9, he says, but I will sacrifice to you with a voice of thanksgiving. That which I have vowed, I will pray. Salvation is the Lord. And then, of course, in verse 10, then the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah up onto the dry land. But our verse specifically, though, I think is great, because isn't this such a true testament to us in our lives as well too, when something has gone wrong and we are pleading with God, right? This is something that I fall into too many times. I find myself kind of pleading with God, or we'll find ourselves making a deal with God almost, right? So more so a one-sided deal for us, like, well, God, if you just let me get a raise at work, I'll give 5% more of my tithing to church, or I'll start actually giving to church now, or if I just meet the girl of my dreams, then I guess maybe I'll think about going to church. Like it's a lot of these kind of lose situations for God, in the sense of like we raise such high, perfect, amazing things and standards that we're like, oh yeah, God, if you just make this happen, maybe I'll get around to doing what you want, right? Like if I have time, but if you want to help me out so I can get what I want, then that would be great. It's not how it works, right? It's never how it's going to work. It's never how it ever has worked. We have to be willing to sacrifice. We have to be willing to give of ourselves so that way God can use us for his plan. And I think Jonah does a great job reiterating that during his prayer, his words to the Lord as he's here in this verse. He says this, but I with shouts of grateful praise will sacrifice to you. He's telling God, he's like, I will sacrifice myself. Here I am on your behalf. Use me, take me. What do you want to do with me, Lord? If you just get me out of this whale, I will sacrifice myself for your good. So that begs the question then today, as you get ready to wrap up your day, Memorial Day weekend is right around the corner, getting ready for the weekend. What's your whale, right? What's your whale? What's your fish? What are you stuck inside right now? And what are you pleading to God to get you out of? And if God gets you out of that, what are you going to do? How are you going to react? Are you going to do what you said you were going to do? Are you going to go to church? Are you going to talk to that family member that's been causing you heartache that you vowed you'd actually go do if God just did X, Y, Z? What is it? What's your fish? What's your whale? For me, I think it's important for us to own up to our challenges. It's important for us to be held accountable for what our fish is, what our obstacles are that we're trying to overcome right now. And for me, I'm trying to overcome the obstacle of this work, family, school, network, coaching, church, jumbo mess that I've got going on right now. And I'd like to think I've got a fairly good handle on it, and I'm doing my absolute best to not let anything slip. But ultimately, when you're trying to hold on to multiple things, something is bound to kind of slip through the cracks at some point. Lord willing, that doesn't end up happening, but sometimes sacrifices have to be made. Sometimes you have to say goodbye to something. You have to let something go so that way you can better serve those. And we try to have a very solid rule in my family. It's God, family, work, regardless of what that looks like. So our obligations, our time are to God first and what he has planned for us. Then it's with each other as a family, between my wife and my sons. And then it's really about what comes after that. If we can go to work 9 to 5 or whatever our schedule is and provide a great service to those we're working for, great. But leave work at work. It's obviously hard for me because I also run a network as well too. So that is outside of normal business hours at times when I finally have free time. But then what does that look like? Is that the sacrifices? Are you getting up early to do that? Are you staying up a little bit later after you spend quality family time just to get those couple things done as well? So find out what those fishes are. Find out what those whales are that you're stuck inside, that you think you're stuck inside and you're asking God to save you from. But be prepared that if God does what you are asking of him to do, be prepared to follow up with what you're bargaining with, what you're saying you're going to do, because God is an amazing God that has no bounds, that has no way of stopping once he gets going. So keep that in mind. But identify your whale, your fish today, and lean into God and ask for what you need to help to get out of that. And once you do, make sure you follow through with what God's asking you to do now at that point, once he's brought you out of your hardship in those difficult times. You've been listening to the Verse of the Day podcast presented by Public House Media. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Verse of the Day. I hope you'll go and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Google Play Music as well. A new episode comes out every Monday through Friday. You won't want to miss it. More information about Verse of the Day can be found by heading over to thephmedia.com.